Yeah,
actually, it's me, him, and one other kid that are the usuals. So it would kind of be cheating.
I see. So it's like, hey kid, how about a puzzle, right?
Wait, there were more kids when?
Last semester.
Oh, okay. I thought you said last time, and I'm like, wait, did I miss anything?
Yeah. Hey, maybe I'll show up. I'll bring some puzzles, and we'll have a good time.
I should really go to start going to clubs. Hours. Yeah.
Go for it.
2, right?
Yeah, 4, yeah.
4.
Guys, I'm in advanced research for psychology. Would you guys mind participating in my research? I'm gonna hand out 2 papers. One is just the consent form, just sign it and put it off to the side. The other is the questionnaire. Just fill that out to the best of your ability, please. It's all confidential. You don't have to do it. You can stop at any point. All that fun, normal research stuff.
Just sign the consent form. You're like giving away your first $100,000 of earnings for the next 10 years. But, you know.
Who's your professor? Yeah.
I'm probably going to be
What? Oh, I mean, you can if you want to, yeah, sure. So what's it?
before.
What's a year is freshman? Yeah.
What?
it'll take you longer and I'll be done.
Go really fast.
The last sheet I handed out is just kind of explaining thank you and explaining if you need to reach me. If you have any questions, you can. My contact information is at the bottom. Thank you guys.
All right. Well, let's go and take a look at where we left off last time. We have to support each other's research. So. All right. So let's start by looking at our logic puzzle from last time. Once this thing comes up. So if anyone would like to propose a solution, I'm all ears. As you might recall, we had a slight curve in the Yes.
I don't exactly remember what I thought this. I probably have to call it out. But I thought last class that it was a silver one.
Okay.
And
Well,
that's
what's-
because if at most one of the three statements is true, I went through, I looked if none of the statements are true, do they agree and which casket do they point to, and then individually if each one is true and the other two are false, do they all point to the same one? Do they agree? If none of them are true, then you know that the casket is not, or the portrait's not in the gold one, it is in the silver one, and that it is in the gold one. So that can't possibly be true. If you think that the first statement's true, that means that the portrait is in the gold one, it's not in the silver one, and that it is in the gold one, which I think I missed that before. It's a, the silver, it would be saying that if the silver one's lying, it would be in the silver one, but it would also at the top say that it's in the gold one, and at the bottom new line says it's in the gold one. So that disagrees. Then, if the silver statement's true, the portrait is not in the gold one, it is not in the silver one, and it is in the gold one. And then, if the lead one is true, it's not in the gold one, so it must be in the gold or silver. And then the silver is lying, saying it's not in that one, which means it is in there. And the gold one's lying, and so that it would have to be in the silver or lead, which in that case we lead means to think that it's in silver. But one requires the conditions I just said, and then you think that's in gold. So.
It's a good try. I mean, I think that actually would work as a method of analysis. And I think you managed, I mean, besides that one bit, you managed to eliminate all the other ones. Do you have a proposition? Okay. So that also works, right? So there are, right. So it is it's kind of a little easier to just say if the portrait is here, what is the truth value of the statements, and go through the three possibilities. Although your method also worked, but you had to go through four possibilities, which is non-true plus each one of the others true. So it's a little easier, but yes. So as it turned out, silver is it because that's the only possibility which leads to only one statement or less being true. Right? Okay. So let's stick around with good old Portia. What? Yeah. You see what we can come up with this slide. Now we have a different truth conditions as far as how many statements can be true or false. And how can be true. So we're ready to move along. All right. So last time we were discussing some details about mortgage-style loans and loan amortization. So let us just continue on with the spreadsheet that we were building last time, because I have a few other things I want to throw in there. So as you recall, first of all, as we discussed, in order to find the relationship between the payment amounts, the number of payments, the interest rate, and the value of the loan, is basically a simple idea of figuring out how much money we need to put in today to receive the payment at an interest rate. Right? In other words, finding the present value of the payment and adding the loan. It has to be the case that the present value of the loan, the principal of the amount of money that we're paying today, is has to be the sum of either the cash flow discounted by the number of periods. Right? So this is what we have right over there. Right? We're looking for the amount of money we put in today at 3.5% annual rate, which is whatever that is per month. Right? So this is how much we need to put in today to get 898 something in 1 month, this is how much we need to put in to get that in 2 months, etc. Right? So finding the value of each of those payments, then we're adding them all up, and we know that we want all of these to equal to the principal, initial principal of the loan of $200,000. Right? So just to make sure you all remember where we are here, right? And so again, if we have that closed form expression for doing that sum without actually summing anything, but we're not really using it here. But by trial and error, we can find what must be that payment value in order to make it true, right? And we have a nice goal seek function in Excel here that is able to kind of automatically try a bunch of different values and zero in on the correct result, right? So, in a similar fashion, we can also find what would be the interest rate that we can afford to pay on a mortgage. Again, assuming that we know the maximum payment that we can make, and assuming we know the value of the house that we buy, right? So, for example, we can say, all right, let's imagine that I'm buying a house and I need to pay out $200,000 mortgage, right? And we know that we make a mortgage, and given my level of income, I can afford to pay a maximum of $1,000 a month, right? So that I know my payment is going to be $1,000. And so the question you might ask yourself is, what is the maximum interest rate that I can afford to pay given this information, right? So then, as you are going around and looking at the mortgage rate, you can find out whether the prevailing mortgage rate, given your credit history and all that other stuff, will allow you to purchase the home, right? Now, at this point, we already know that if the interest rate is 3.5%, you will be able to afford it because those conditions, the payment is $898, right? So make a guess. If the payment is $1,000, what would be the interest rate that we're paying on the mortgage? Is it going to be higher or lower than 3.5%? It would have to be higher, right? We're giving them more money, right? So it must be that there's a higher interest rate. So you might be interested to know, what is the maximum interest rate that your ability to pay is going to support given these conditions? So in a similar fashion, we can figure out what is, again, it's a trial and error problem, right? We can ask the software to zero in on the interest rate that will produce exactly $1,000 payment, right? And that will be the maximum interest rate we can afford to pay. Right, so with that. Oh, so we were actually working on loan amortization and interest. I guess we'll come back to that in a bit, right? So now we're going to say, imagine that our payment is $1,000, right? So you can ignore this column for now, right? So just focus on this. So this would be the present value of each of the $1,000 payments given that interest rate, right? Now what we need to do is tweak this interest rate until such a point that the value of those payments is equal to $200,000, right? So again, we're going to go here, look at the goal seek, right? And so we're going to set this cell to $200,000 by changing the interest rate, right? So before we were setting it equal to $200,000 by changing the payment amount in order to figure out how much we'd have to pay at 3.5%. Now we're changing the interest rate and saying what would be the interest rate if we were paying $1,000, right? And that would give us, the maximum rate we can afford to pay. So let's give it a try, see what happens. Looks like about 4.38%, right? So given these parameters, you can say, okay, I know that I should be able to afford this house as long as I can get a mortgage at 4.38 something percent or less, right? Because if it is exactly 4.38%, your payment will be $1,000. If it's less than 4.38, your payment will be less than 1,000, so it will be even happier, right? So then you can go out to the internet and then like do some rate shopping and see what kind of a rate you can get, right? Make sense? Any questions? Okay. All right, so now last time, let's just do that. Go back, we're back at 3.5%, we're paying 898. And so, the thing that we want to look at here is what is the mechanics of this loan, right? Because every payment we're paying some interest, and we're also paying some principal, right? Ideally, because if we're paying less than the interest that is accruing, we're never going to pay off the loan, right? Because every period we pay some interest and then we don't pay off any principal, right? So it's never going to pay off. So let's see. So the question that we had up here before we left last time is how much interest will accrue on our $200,000 principal in the span of 1 month? Well, it'll be 0.29% of the principal, right? So that that will be the amount of interest that accrues in the first month. All right. So let's hope that this amount is less than $898 that we're paying, right? Ideally, since we know that the present value of 360 of these payments is $200,000, we know that we are paying off some principal because by the end of 30 years we will have paid off the loan, right? Okay. So what's going on here? How do you find 200,000 times the monthly interest rate, and that would be the interest that accrues in the first period. There it is, 583. So that means that out of the $898 payment, $583 goes to interest, and the other bit, which is about the other $300, goes to principal. Right? So most of the payment goes just to pay the interest, and only $300 goes to pay off the principal in the first month. Right? Okay. So insert a row and label these things. Time. This is the mean of payment. This is the payment. And this is the interest. This is the principal repayment. Right? So let's just move this here. Okay, so so our principal repayment then is going to be the payment amount minus the amount that goes to interest, right? Which is $314 goes to interest. And it goes to principal in the first payment, and the 500 goes to interest. Now, what's going to happen in the next? Yes.
What do you mean like goes to? Like when you say like goes to principal?
All right. That's an excellent question. If I wasn't clear, let me explain. Right. So we have a loan of $200,000, right? And so we calculated that in the first period, $583 will accrue in interest. Just like if you take out $100 at 5% for a year, after a year, $5 of interest will accrue, right? So in this case, $583 of interest has accrued, and so when we make the first payment, that 583 portion of it goes to pay off that interest. Now, so the rest of it, which is 300, goes to reduce the principal. Just as, if you borrow 100 and pay 5%, after a year your accrued becomes 105. So if you make, say, a $20 payment, what happens is you pay off the $5 interest, plus, and the rest of the 15 goes to pay off the principal, right? That means after you make this payment, you will have $85 principal loan outstanding still. And so that means that after the first payment, we will have 200,000 minus this still outstanding and accruing interest. Right? Make sense? All right. So since we have reduced our principal by a little bit, so that next month we're only accruing interest not on the whole 200,000, but on 200,000 minus a bit, right? What do you think will be the interest amount over the next period? Maybe it's a confusingly worded question. Let me just put this in here, right? So this is a principal payment, and so the new principal at the end of the period is going to be equal to 200,000 minus the principal payment that we just made, right? So now the principal of our loan is now just slightly less than 200,000. So over the next month, we're going to accrue again 0.29% on our principal. But now the principal is not 200,000, it's slightly less. So that means the interest that we accrue is going to be slightly less than $583.33, right? So in the next period, the interest that we will accrue is still going to be the monthly interest rate, but this is going to be based on the new lower principal because we have repaid part of the principal after the first month, right? So check it out, $582. So in the next period, $582 of our payment will go to interest again, and $315 some will go to principal, right? And so therefore our new principal amount is going to be the old principal minus the payment that we made. Right? So slowly you can see we're eating into the outstanding principal of the loan. But it's happening a lot slower than you would think, because most of the payments are going to interest, right? Just kind of keeping you floating above water, right? And getting you paying off the interest, and whatever is left only goes to the principal, right? Make sense? Any questions so far? Okay. And now, of course, let's just lock in this cell. And so we can start filling these down, right? So every period, you can see that, we make our payment of $898, right? We pay some interest, we pay some principal, we get a new lower principal, and we pay a little less interest, and a little more goes to principal until we get a slightly lower principal, and so on and so forth. You can see that our principal is slowly getting reduced, right? And so every period, slightly less goes to interest, and slightly more goes to principal, right? So we could take that and fill it all the way down, and so we can see what's going on. So towards the end, well, some rounding error here, right? So towards the end, you can see that most of the payment goes to principal, and only little goes to interest because our outstanding principal is lower and lower and lower, right? So by the end, when we make the last payment, we pay off the last bit of interest and the last bit of principal, and we're done, right? So somewhere here in the middle, right, you can see that interest is only $300, and we're paying $583 towards the principal, right? So does this make sense? Sort of the mechanics of how the repayment of a fixed term, fixed interest, and fixed payment loan happens under that, right? Okay. So one thing, now one reason it's important to realize these sort of mechanics is because, as it happens, mortgage interest is tax deductible, right? So if you happen to buy a house and you take out a mortgage and you're paying a mortgage, all the interest payments that you make throughout the year are basically paid with pre-tax money, right? So they will take a deduction on the interest payment. So that means, let's say for the first year, here in the first 12 months, right? You can say, how much interest did I pay on my mortgage in the first year? Well, this is not going to be just the sum of your payments, right? Because part of those payments is principal repayment. So you'll only be able to take a tax deduction on the interest payments that you make, right? So if you wanted to say, what's going to be my mortgage interest tax deduction for the first year, you would say, well, let me just do this random cell, that will be the sum of the interest payments for the first 12 months. Assuming, you timed your house purchase to be right at the beginning of the year, right? So that you were talking the first 12 months to coincide with the span of the year. Of course, if it happens to be somewhere in the middle, you pick the months that are in your tax year. Right? And so the sum of the interest payments is about $7,000 for this particular case. So that means that in this, at first, as soon after you take out the mortgage, your tax deduction on the interest will be $69.38. Now, in the following years, this is going to shrink more and more, right? Because as we said, the principal shrinks, and therefore the amount of interest in each payment also shrinks. So the next year, your tax deduction on mortgage interest is going to be something less than the $6,900 something, right? So you can, if you want, you can go and calculate that. So our next year's tax deduction is going to be month 13 through 24, right? So $6,800. And you can see, as we go down through the years, as you get out to year 25 and year 30, right, the amount of interest that you pay is less and less, and so the deductibility of the interest is, you're going to take a lower tax deduction. But up front, up at the start, it's kind of an important consideration because most of the payment that you make go to interest. So it means that most of your payments are actually tax deductible. So in effect, your mortgage payment is cheaper to you than it would be to buy something else by spending that money, right? Because you can take a tax deduction, get some money back from your taxes. In effect, you're not paying the full $898 every month, right? Because you get some of it back in the form of a tax rebate. I mean, it's not that you were getting it back; it's that you're giving less to the government, right? So the government is not going to give you stuff; they're just going to not take as much from you if you're lucky. All right? Okay, is this making sense? All right. Speaking of money getting taken from you, have you guys heard of what's going on in Europe and in Cyprus in particular? Yeah, some pretty exciting events. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but essentially, this brings us back to the importance of FDIC insurance, right? Because Cyprus is a relatively small island country, and it's a member of the European Union. And what happened is they were offering relatively attractive interest rates, and a lot of deposits from all over Europe came into Cyprus. But we have discussed how the banks work, right? When you deposit some money, the bank is not just sitting on your money in a giant vault, they're lending it out, right? They're making money on your loan. So what the Cyprus banks did is they basically invested a lot of money into Greek government debt. But we already know that, within the last few years, the Greek government basically defaulted on its debt also, right? It wasn't technical, for various technical reasons, they structured it so it wasn't an actual default, so they wouldn't trigger the credit default provisions on a bunch of derivatives. But essentially, they forced the creditors of the government to voluntarily take, 50% haircut of the money that was owed to them. So you thought we owed you $1,000? Well, now we only owe you $500. right? So in effect, it was, it was a partial default. So of course that means that the Cyprus banks suffered significant losses, right? So if they lent out a bunch of people's money and then they suffered a significant haircut on that money, now they don't have enough money to fulfill the obligations to the depositors, right? So they needed like a bailout. And so in this particular case, they came to the European Central Bank and they're like, give us some money. Right? The European Central Bank was like, well, we'll give you some money, but you have to come up with some of the money for yourself as well. We're not just going to give you all of this money. We'll give you like 10 billion euros, but you have to come up with 5 billion euros, right? And so the way they came up with it is they said, so it looks like we have a bunch of people's deposits in our banks. So why don't we just take, right? And that's basically what they did. They were like, okay, all depositors are now taking a 40% haircut. So you thought you had $1 million in the bank? Now you only have 600,000. Right? So initially they were thinking of like taking a haircut from everybody, but they needed like to pass a special law to be able to take a haircut from people below the insurance limit. In Europe, they'll have an equivalent depository insurance up to 100,000 euros. And just like here, we have the FDIC insurance, which is currently up to 250 stuff, right? In Europe, they have it up to 100,000 euros. And so, none of the MPs in Cyprus voted for it, like it didn't pass. It was okay. We're going to leave the 100,000 euro people untouched, but we'll take even more from people who have more than 100,000, right? So it was there was a lot of fun, a lot of drama going on. It was fun if it's not happening to you, right? It wasn't very fun for people who had money in Cyprus banks. As soon as they started discussing, like people rushed to the bank to like try to get their money right before they passed this resolution. And the banks were like, yeah. So, of course, the good part is that the president apparently has been discovered, managed to withdrew some tens of millions of his own euros from the bank before that happened. Right? It's good to be the president. Right? You got some inside information. So yes, just just goes to show you that when you put your money somewhere, you have to think what are the risks, right? So as far as us regular folks are concerned, the FDIC insurance is a very important safeguard, right? Because it is relatively easy to lose money that is not FDIC insured. Like the bank fails, you're going to lose some money. Right? It has happened here, it happened in Europe, has been happening all over the place. So you really want to be cognizant of this limit. It's not just a big hypothetical, oh, it's never going to happen type of thing. These things actually do happen. Right? Okay. So, any questions about anything we've mentioned so far? Okay. So now the other important consideration, probably maybe for all of you, sometime, some years in the future, but it's good, it's good to know these things for if you ever get around to buying a house. Another important consideration when you go out and take out a mortgage is a bunch of fees that you're going to charge before you get to take out the loan. Right? And these, the fees, we're not talking about like $50. We're talking about like $5,000. Right? So these are like serious fees, right? So there are a lot of things involved. One of the big ones is going to be like title insurance. What is title insurance? I don't know. I think it sounds kind of useful. Whoever you want it, right? But since you're using your house as a collateral for the loan, for the mortgage loan, right, the bank wants to be sure that you have legal title to the property, right, that you are owning the property. So what they're going to do is they'll do sort of search through the records to make sure that nobody else has a claim on this property, right? Because, I mean, from the standpoint of the guy who's giving you the loan, kind of important, right? Because if you say, okay, I have this house, this is going to be my collateral, and then it turns out that some other guy comes in and says, wait a second, you know, I have this house now, right? Because look, I have this, you know, documentation that proves that, like, I have claim on some part of the house. You know, a lot of the times it would be based on some kind of like, maybe somebody took like a home equity loan and used part of the house as collateral, or like a lien was placed on the house because the previous owner didn't pay property tax, or something like that, right? There's a lot of things, you know, so the bank wants to make sure that it doesn't happen. So they pay, you know, a title insurance company to go and like search the records and make sure that everything is clean. And in general, they're going to charge something on the order of like $1,500 for just that particular day, right? Then they're going to send their, well, it doesn't mean, it's not going to be necessarily their guy, but like somebody has to provide for an independent appraiser to come and visit the house and like inspect it and make sure that it actually is a house out there, right? Not that, oh, look at that, you know, I have this like trailer sitting on my property and I'll use it to get like $200,000 mortgage, right? The bank wants to make sure there actually is the property that you're using for collateral and it is actually worth something. It's not like falling apart and it's gonna like crash tomorrow and you have nothing on collateral, right? So an appraisal is going to cost you another like $400 or $500. Right? So then the loan, the actual loan origination company, which would probably be like a bank or someone specializing in issuing mortgages, they're going to charge you fees just for like sitting there and giving you a loan. Right? And that would be called the loan origination fee. I mean, they come up with all sorts of nice sounding names so they can charge you fees, right? And so the loan origination fee is generally where you have the most flexibility in variability as far as how much your fees are. But like one company might charge you like $2,000 in loan origination fee, and another company might charge you like $500, right? So that's one important reason to like shop around for different mortgage sources is that you can have a lot of flexibility. Now, even mortgage insurance and appraisals, they can be flexible as well. Like if the company says, oh, we'll send our own appraiser, and then they're like tacking on a bit of a profit margin on the appraisal, you get to pay an extra couple $100 on the appraisal, right? Or they will use our title insurance company, right? And as it happens, our title insurance company charges like $2,000, right? But by law, you're allowed to source your own title insurance if you want to, right? So they try to say, oh, look, everything's convenient, we'll take care of everything. Just pay us all this money, right? But even if you shop around, you'll find that different mortgage providers charge very different amounts of fees for all of this type of stuff. So, I mean, some people have really been reamed on this when they haven't been careful, they didn't know what they were doing. They go take out a mortgage and they get charged like $10,000 in fees. It's really soft, like $10,000. Right? And on average, maybe if you go to a big bank and make that money, like $4,000 to $5,000. If you go on the internet and you shop around, you can get away with maybe like $2,000 to $2,500. Right? So you can save significant amount of money, right? And relative to the purchase price of the house, you might make not so much. Still, a couple $1,000 is a couple $1,000, right? So it is important to pay attention to that kind of stuff. Again, maybe this is a little ways removed for you for now, but just to realize that a lot of the stuff, a lot of the places where banks really make a lot of money is on the fees side. Yeah.
So if you don't have a 30-year mortgage on the house, but you only say that it's 15 years and then you want to sell it, would new people who buy it from you have to stick to that fixed rate plan that you were saying, or can they get their own new plan to pay off the rest of the mortgage?
Not only do they, can they get their own, they have to, because the loan is in your name and based on your credit worthiness. So when you sell the house, what happens is that the other guy does his own thing, like you don't care where he gets the money, probably he's taking it mortgage, right? So he will take the money and pay you the whole price of the house. And then you will use part of that to repay the rest of the mortgage that you have outstanding, right? So let's so let's imagine like you're living in your house for like 10 years. And so you say, okay, it looks like I repay a significant fraction of my mortgage, right? So maybe my house is worth now, I'm selling my house for $500,000, right? And maybe the outstanding balance of my mortgage is, say, $200,000, right? So this is the outstanding mortgage balance. All right, so when you sell the house, you would sell it for the mortgage value of $500,000, right? So the other guy, he will have to come up with $500,000 somewhere. Not your problem, right? Doesn't matter. All you want to understand is I'm selling it to you for 500, so you better come up with 500,000, right? So he is going to come up with 500,000 by taking out his own mortgage somewhere. Right? It'll probably be like a nice, fresh 30-year mortgage. He will send you $500,000. You'll say, okay, I'll use 200 of it to pay off the outstanding balance of the mortgage, and get to keep the other 300 in my pocket, right? And maybe I'll use some of that to pay a down payment on my new house, or maybe I'll use some of that to right? So that's 2 or 300 to do the repay. You're going to repay the whole mortgage. Yeah.
Like, so if you make 300,000 off of that and you don't put it into a new house, does that count as like income that you have to pay like tax on?
Now it's actually pretty nice, like you would, but there's a special exemption. So if you, then the exemption is up to $500,000 on the sale of your primary residence, right? So in this case, you would, well, first of all, $500,000 of profit. So if 10 years ago you bought the house for say $300,000, and now you're selling it for $500,000, your gain is only $200. All right. So it's not even the whole 300 that you're getting. If you paid 300 and you sell for 5, you only need 2. Right? And second of all, right, up to $500,000 in gain is protected from income tax. So you can make that, you take the profit on the sale of your primary residence. You don't have to worry about paying tax on your capital gains unless it exceeds $500,000. And then you only pay tax on the overage for the $500,000. Right? So it's pretty nice. There's a lot of nice, sort of favorable tax treatments that go along with purchasing and selling a house. Right? Good questions on that. Any other thoughts or concerns?
That 200,000 is the amount left on your mortgage. Is that just left with principal or left with principal?
Well, you don't pay interest until it accrues, right?
Okay.
So this is the outstanding principal. Maybe when you were buying a house, we assume you bought it for 300, so maybe that's a little bit too high for outstanding mortgage balance after 10 years. But you didn't make the numbers really fit the whole story, right? But yes, this would be the outstanding principal. So if we go back to the spreadsheet, imagine that you decide to sell your house after 10 years. So that would be after how many months of loan payments? 120, okay. So let's scroll down to 120th month, right? So in month 120, we make this payment after the end of the 10th year, right? And $452 of that will go to interest that accrued over the month, and another $445 will go to the principal. And at this point, the principal balance on our loan is $154,000, right? So if we wanted to just repay the loan right now, in full, this is how much money you would have to pay to the bank, right? It's just the outstanding principal balance, right? And so also you might notice that after 10 years, which is like 1/3 of the 30-year mortgage term, we still paid off only about 1/4 of the principal, right? Because most of the payments were going to interest. So the principal repayment schedule will accelerate as you go further toward the end of the mortgage, because as the outstanding principal is smaller and smaller, the interest accruing is also smaller and smaller, and therefore you're paying the principal faster and faster. Right? Just sort of another little bit of repayment mechanics coming into play. Okay? So now, of course, the other thing is that in general, if you when you sell the house, you would probably be paying some kind of a broker to basically list it for you and market it for you and sell it, etc. Right? And generally, you would probably pay something in the order of like a 5% fee on the purchase price of the house to the broker. Right? So out of the $500,000 that the other guy is going to pay you, you will pay like $25,000 to your broker, right? And then you pay the other $200,000 in mortgage, so you pay between like $275,000, right? And of course, as far as taxation is concerned, the broker fees like count as like not part of the cost. But anyway, so this is that's a lot of these a lot of issues involved here. There are a lot of costs when you move into a mortgage and when you move out of the house, right? There are whenever you get a new mortgage, you have to pay the fees all over again. If you sell this house and then you move to another house and you take out a new mortgage, right? Number one, you have to pay, as a seller, you pay the broker fee. Number two, when you take out the new mortgage, you have to pay the new mortgage fee again, right? So, I mean, if you're planning to hang out and stay in your house for a long time, like these are like one-time fees, you don't have to worry about it. You can spread them out over many years. But if you move around every couple of years, you will incur these big fees. So it'll be a really expensive proposition to be going and buying houses and selling them back again, unless you happen to be lucky and if you make a big profit on property value appreciation, right? But if we're not in a property bubble, we probably can't really count on huge profits over a couple of years of owning a house, right? Right, makes sense? Okay. So, when you go out and you compare the different mortgage providers who are making different offers, like how much they're willing to give you at what interest rate, right? It's relatively easy to say, okay, I can see that here. So let's say I have one guy. Who is giving me, who is willing to give me a $200,000 mortgage at, say, 3.5%, and the fees involved in all of this is, say, $2,000. And I have another guy who is also willing to give me $200,000, and it's also at 3.5%, and the fees are $5,000. Well, in this case, it's pretty easy to say, well, duh, I'm going to go with the guy who's only charging $2,000 in fees, right? But what if it happens that, this guy with is charging $5,000 in fees is charging you also a slightly smaller rate, and maybe he'll charge you 3.2%. In this case, how do we make the decision? How do we make the trade-off? Which deal is better? Well, remember that this percentage interest rate will be charged on you for the duration of the loan. You don't just pay an extra 0.3% once. You're going to pay this extra 0.3% for the entire lifetime of the loan.
Yeah, I thought you were.
Right? So this is the terms of the loan that you're taking out. Yes.
So you do the calculations like we just did, except for each one, and then you add in the $2,000 and the $5,000 to the total amount that you pay and say, see which one is less.
And so we can in fact use exactly the same approach that we did when we talked about buying a car, right? We said if I do this, how much money am I giving up? If I do that, how much money am I giving up, right? And really that is the proper way to do that. To take into account the timing of all of the cash flows that's happening, right? And take into account what is your alternative investment rate that you can assume, and figure out what is going to be better for you, right? But a lot of people who don't know any of the stuff that we learn here would find it pretty difficult to figure that out, right? So in order to sort of make it easier to compare, there is a technique that is used to basically build the fees into the effective rate. So in other words, we're going to say, you know what? I don't know what's going on. I don't know how to do the spreadsheet stuff, right? And so what happened is that the mortgage providers are mandated to include the fees and give you, an effective APR rate on your mortgage, including the fees. So how do we do that? Let me just walk through this. So let's imagine that here we're taking the $200,000 loan out at 3.5%, but we also have to pay $2,000 in fees, right? So what this actually means is that we're not getting $200,000. We're getting $198,000, right? So, now of course the mortgage payments. And so the mortgage payments are going to be calculated based on this, $200,000 and a mortgage rate of 3.5%. And we already know that the payments are going to be $898 per month plus income, right? But really, we're not getting $200,000. Really, we're getting $198,000, right? So then we can say, so if we're only getting $198,000, what is the effective discount rate on all of the future payments? Right? Because now we know that the present value of all of these payments has to add up not to $200,000, it has to add up to $198,000. Right? Now, in order for it to add up to something less than $200,000, you have to increase the discount rate. Right? So let's go back to the spreadsheet right here and say, okay, so we took out the $200,000, mortgage, right? And these are the payments that we're going to pay because we're getting charged 3.5% rate. But we know that there are $2,000 in fees. So what is the effective interest rate that I'm getting charged? Well, let's go back and use our goal seek. All right, so now we're going to set this cell not to 200,000 but to 198,000, right? By changing the interest rate. See, so the effective rate we're getting charged on the first loan, assuming we just take it out and stick with the loan to maturity, is 3.58% rather than 3.5. Right? Yes. Well, because right, so when you take out a loan, what happens is that you say, you give me 200,000, and in exchange I'll give you some payments. But what actually happens is they say, you give me 200,000, and I give you 2,000 of it back right away in fees, and in exchange I'll give you some payments. So really, you're only getting 198. You don't get to borrow the whole 200,000, right? Borrow the 100,000, but you have to give them 2,000 right away, right? So that's why we subtract it basically from the amount of money you're actually taking in, right? Make sense? Good question. I'm explaining a lot of this stuff, but it's clear to me. But if I don't explain it well, and it's unclear to you, please make sure to ask the question to clarify, right? But otherwise, I don't know if I'm just like glossing over something that I think makes sense when it maybe doesn't, right? So in this case, we know that the effective rate on this guy, with a $200,000 and $2,000 in fees, he is 3.581%. So now we can find, well, what is the effective interest rate that the other guy is charging? Right? So now, what we're going to do is we're going to so first of all, of course, he's going to set slightly different payments, right? So 3.2% interest rate on 200,000, we know that the payment amount is going to be less than the payment amount we would get on 3.5%, right? So let's see what that payment amount is. So again, we are going to do a goal seek. Might as well use this technique here, right? So we're going to set, before we do that, right, we know that we're paying 3.2%, right? So now we're going to set this cell to $200,000 because that's the nominal value of the loan by changing the cash flow amount. Right? So the monthly payment we would get from the second guy is going to be $864,000. Right? Because he's charging a lower interest rate on this loan. But we know that the effective interest rate is going to be higher than 3.2 because we have to pay $5,000 up front for the privilege of getting this loan. Right? So again, now we're going to set this, again, we're going to set this cell to $195,000, right? Because we're not getting 200, we're getting 200 and paying 5,000 right at the back. So by changing the effective interest rate. So this becomes 3.4 over something percent. Right? So, with the difference in the interest rate, because of different fees, like, you can see that they basically have converged a little bit. But still, even if we take into account the fees, the guy that's giving us those lower interest rates seems to be giving us a better deal. And so these are your only two choices. I mean, ideally, you could then, if you're clever, then you could go back to this guy and say, check it out. This guy is giving me a 3.2% interest rate on my mortgage, right? So, would you like to come down on your rate a little bit? Right? And that's how you get a good deal, right? You got to play them against each other, right? And so maybe when you do that, you'll say, okay, maybe we can give you like 3.3%, right? And then maybe that is the case, and then this guy will win over this guy, right? So, but you definitely, in this market, you're not just a price taker. The fees and the rates, but mostly the fees, somewhat the rate, they're all negotiable. If you go and shop around, and you see some guy who seems to be giving you a good rate, you can say, wait a second, but this guy here is making a better deal. And if they want to do business, they will be willing to be flexible, right? So bargaining is this is an important deal here, right? We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars, and if you have differences in interest rate and fee, like this will really add up. So it pays to spend a little bit of time to try to negotiate a good deal. Now, let's see what time do we have. Still have 2 minutes. Okay. So I guess now the other thing is, if you're not planning to keep the loan for the whole 30 years, because you'll probably move after 5 years,
Then you can start saying, okay, so if I get this loan, right? So remember what we have. Right, so when we were paying 3.5%, what was that? $898 at our monthly payment. Right? Now that we're taking 3.2%, we'll have $864 a month. So you could say, roughly speaking, how many months will it take you to make up the $3,000 difference? And so again, this is roughly speaking because you're not making these payments right up front and the timing of the payment matters. But sort of a ballpark estimate, you can think, which loan is going to be better for me by saying, well, this is about a $34 difference in payment. So how many months of payments will it take you to make up a $3,000 difference? So we say, okay, $3,000 over 35 bucks in payments, so whatever that is. Something like 90 months, right? So that means that if you're thinking that you might use 5 years, well, 90 months is more than 5 years, right? 5 years is 60 months. So that means you would be better off taking this. You cannot negotiate. You would be better off taking this one. Because you know that if you sell the house in 5 years, you would have paid out still a lot. This way. I think you need to yeah, so you'd be better off taking this one, but even though you're paying an extra $30 for 5 years, that doesn't add up to the extra $3,000 a year. Right? So if you know that you'll stay there for like a whole 30 years, then the second loan is better for you. But if you're only staying in the house for 5 years, then maybe you're better off